All right, it's time to get back into this, and it looks like Fighter's up next. We had a lot of fun with this one, mainly because Fighter in general is just fun, with or without the use of Limit Break. Use Limit Break. Alright, a brief history and explanation about Fighter. Fighter is the second combat class to ever truly come in the game for close range. It uses a double saber, a dagger, or as I like to call them, anti-gravity daggers, and of course hand-to-hand gloves or knuckles. Fun fact about this class, even though this is its first appearance in a Phantasy Star franchise, pretty much its entire weapon loadout actually stems from secret weapons, if you could call them that, from Phantasy Star Online 1. The double saber was not an in-game based default weapon, it was a rare discovery that could happen. And the knuckles, well, those were a little bit more common, but rarely were any of them actually ever good. In fact, most people consider the knuckles weapon to be a joke just because the most common knuckles that people used to find was Knuckles, the character from Sonic the Hedgehog. Yeah, I know that sounds a little confusing, but if you ever put in Knuckles, apostrophe S, Knuckles, I'm pretty sure it'll show up for you. And that's pretty much it. Like I said, this class's first appearance is strictly from this game. As I mentioned earlier, the weapons for this class are the double saber, which is a two-sided sword stuck together at the hilt. You want to think Darth Maul, or just look up double lightsaber and I'm pretty sure it'll show up. The second weapon is Knuckles, or the hand-to-hand. Don't expect any kicking, only punching. So you want to think of it more like boxing gloves, even though it's called Knuckles. And of course, the almighty anti-gravity, daggers. Yeah. For some reason, they keep you in the air. Alright, so let's get into the pros. And we're going to start off with the daggers first. Not just because they're my personal favorite, but that's the one people seem to want me to start off with for this. Alright. The twin daggers, besides being held backhanded at all times, have a very unusual photon art skill tree and list. The way it works is, for some reason, your main goal with these weapons, even though the range is short and the damage is continuous and a lot faster than something like your sword, is to get your opponent in the air and basically kill them in the air. And again, none of this is hyperbole. For some reason, Sega decided that the daggers' job is to basically keep you and your enemy in the air. Just doing the normal attacks alone with the dagger can keep you up in the air for an extended period of time. Now, it's very, very outdated. It's about, I want to say 4 to 5 years old, but there is a video of someone just doing the traditional normal attack, holding down the normal attack button after jumping in game with the twin daggers. And I believe it took him a few minutes to actually touch the ground again. It's crazy. They can basically pick up enemies, and also there's a homing ability, and most of those targeting abilities are excessively cheap. However, and this is what I like about it, the photon art damage scales with what you're willing to put up with. Even though this is obviously a weapon that's meant to do fast and hard striking, and the whole class is really meant for continuous damage all the time with various modifiers, the twin daggers have about 2 or 3 photon arts in their list that specifically take a long time to pull off, but they can do the highest damage, and once you get to a certain point, super armor or invulnerability kicks in. And it is a beautiful sight to behold. Also, even though they're twin daggers, one of my favorite pros about them, that does not mean that they can't hit in a wide radius or a wide range. Depending on how much power or ability to link up and connect to an enemy quicker you want to sacrifice, there's a couple photon arts within the list that pull the enemy towards you versus you going towards the enemy. And the ones that pull, they don't just target one enemy at a time. They'll pretty much get, I believe, a maximum of 4 enemies if they're all lined up, or 5 enemies if they're directly in front of one another, and bring them to you. However, I feel like I should mention, when you do any type of lifting or launching, the game has a preset collision detection range, and it won't pick up everybody all the time. It'll get some of them, some may drop out. Basically, if you're not targeting the enemy that you launch into the air, you want to consider everyone else as a bonus enemy. The double saber, breakdance saber, the double saber continues the continuous damage trend, and even though it has a naturally longer photon arc strings and base combo strings, it's really meant to do the wide area damage continuously. Not to mention, even though you shouldn't be able to, but hey, it's a video game, when has logic been a factor? You can throw the double saber in various photon art skills and actually rotate it around the enemy, charge up some of the moves, or throw it out to the enemy to increase your damage and your natural attacking range. Not to mention, there's a few techniques that rush towards the enemy or lunge towards them, which that's the natural state of the fighter. If you're not moving towards your enemy, you're dodging your enemy and hitting them at the same time. And as far as the knuckles go, again, you're basically boxing. Almost everything you do is some variation of a boxing technique or maneuver. However, it has the ability to cause stun with one of its cheaper moves, and it does it in a wave format technique. Now, generally speaking, you really only going to hit something that's directly in front of you or in a cone format and a very small cone format when it comes to the knuckles. They are not meant to do crowd control. And if you think of them that way, then you might want to reevaluate it. Or you're putting too much value in that one stun technique that doesn't do as much damage as pretty much anything on the list. Now, as far as their limit break gears, but I say limit breaks because, hey, look like a duck, quack like a duck, probably a duck. In the case of the twin dagger, it increases the range and striking potential of your daggers. Also, the more you stay in air and the more photon art related things you do in the air, the more of your gauge you can fill. The weapon action even allows you to do slight tilting to the left or the right and an aerial block. Also, with the exception of hero, and even then, that's only with certain photon arts, fighter is the only class that has a built-in aerial block. And it also lets you maneuver at the same time. You can block with hunter, obviously, but you're not going to spin around and also cause damage and also deflect moves off of you. Well, actually, I shouldn't say deflect, because deflecting... Is aerial deflecting an actual thing? Anyways, yeah. The weapon action allows you to move around and block anything that's oncoming at the same time, as well as providing a little bit of continuous damage. A little bit for the twin daggers. In the case of the double saber, again, you get the standard range of effect increase for your photon arts and special skills of that nature, but you also are able to create tornadoes, which do various things depending on certain photon arts, or if you just use the weapon action by itself. Now, these tornadoes, besides pulling people in, again also causes continuous damage, which is the bread and butter of any good fighter. Now, Knuckles, which is, I won't say it's the most technical, but for me, it's one of the most annoying gear gauges, limit break type situations in the game. Every time you do any attack with that weapon, it builds up meter, which increases your damage, but also your striking speed. But as soon as you stop any form of an action, the meter immediately goes back down to 0. For example, if you were to do your normal attack punch, it'll give you 1 to 1.5 levels on your gear gauge. And then if you do anything else, it'll automatically get to 3, which means everything you're about to do from a photon art to a normal attack is not only going to be sped up, but do more damage. But the minute you stop, or if you run out of photon points, it's going to reset back to 0. Now, the weapon action for this, though, is pretty unique, or I guess very technical. It's a invulnerability state. As with a dash or step, as they like to call them for any of the other classes. The difference is that it's not on the skill tree, so you can't actually level it up. You just have to take the time frame you got and go and dodge whenever you see fit. Because when you do that, nothing's going to hit you, and you can go directly back to that bread and butter continuous damage. However, mastering that move is completely dependent on what monster you're facing. Because you can practice all day and night, but the minute a new type of enemy comes out, or somebody can shoot you from off screen with a long range magic or a long range attack, it's going to throw off your timing. And once your timing's thrown off, or you're actually put into a hit collision detection state, you have to worry about an issue where how fast can your weapon action kick back in. Personally, I'd say it's one of the weaker weapon actions of this group, but we'll save that for the cons. Speaking of cons, okay, for the dagger, ain't that many. The real true con for this weapon is its limited range, and even then, a lot of the photon arts make up for that. But, as is pretty much obvious, much like with Hunter, this class is meant to do very specific things in very specific ways. Yes, you can stay in the air pretty much longer than everybody short for like Hero, because Hero can literally stop and cut off any form of gravity detection with the use of its weapon action. But this class is older than that. This is the grandpappy of aerial combat. as far as the game is concerned when it comes to close range. But the dagger's limited, and I do mean limited, ability to strike things outside of a photon art use may be a turnoff for some, especially if you come from Hunter. Every single weapon in the Hunter tree easily can hit 2 to 4 enemies, and depending on how you swing it, no pun intended, the wired lance up to 6 or 7 enemies all at once. However, that's not what you're supposed to be doing with the daggers in the first place. It should be common sense based on the weapon's length. But the fact that it lets you do all of that aerial capabilities, you can home in on enemies on the ground and in the air with very little cost to your photon art points. And the fact that your weapon action, even though, you know, it's going to cut down how much damage you're doing, allows you to escape so much. I can really tell you the only true downside I can come across, of course, many will disagree, with the twin dagger is just the fact that its basic range is so limited. But again, photon arts. So, I mean, is it truly any cons for the dagger? I'm sure someone will tell me in the comments. That aside, moving on to the double saber. Well, my cons for this weapon are more so personal, but I'm leaving those out and I'm just going based on how they're actually handled and implemented in game. One of the biggest things I see with double saber is the cons section would have to be the fact that there's so much potential to lose or miss out on damage. Now see, there are, as I mentioned, some of the best moves for this class are the moves that charge up and you throw out the double saber or you rotate it. But if every enemy isn't in a certain proximity, you could lose out on how they're handled. You could lose out on your max potential damage you can do. Because remember, this weapon is much like the wired lance in the sense that it's not designed to hit one singular target at once. In fact, I feel like that's the primary use for the weapon action, the tornado, to make sure you can get that maximized damage. However, speaking of the tornado, it is a basically one time, one situation type of technique. So the minute you fill that gauge up or you use any levels to your limit gear gauge, yes, I call it limit gear, you'll get over it, which is the gauge that sits directly on top of, you know, your weapon action and icons, the whole gauge gets emptied out for the double saber. All of it. So no matter what you do, you always have to wrestle with that inner turmoil of, do I want to do the maximum potential damage for this photon art, or do I want to reel everyone in and try to build the gauge up again to do this move in the highest level? Also, no aerial capabilities whatsoever, really. Yes, you have a few photon arts that they can be launched and they stop you in midair when you use them. But again, unless you pull out those anti-gravitic, which defies logic, twin daggers, the double saber is not really meant to stay up in the air for any extended period of time. It has nothing that can track enemies, and you're lucky if you can get a grappling move with the double saber that's going to pick up an enemy in the air. The maneuverability is non-existent as well when it comes to the double saber in the air as well. Once you get in the air, you're going to move in whatever direction you were pretty much last holding, or you're just going to hit the ground. Now, whether or not that's a con is up for debate. I feel like it is, just based on the simple fact that you started off with twin daggers being able to keep everyone in air, and then the double saber says, nah, I'm going to stay down. And when we get to the knuckles, the first thing you remember about the knuckles is that, like I told you, whether it's the ground or the air, even though it's not really meant for the air, it still makes sure that it can do its damage as long as something is in front of it and it doesn't go that far away. So take the double saber cons how you will. As far as the knuckles, well, one of the things it can do is also one of the things that is held against it. It can do similar damage on the ground and in the air as long as the enemy is of a close proximity to it, since it has very limited aerial capabilities. In fact, there's only two I can call off offhand, which is the use of the weapon action in air, and also one move that specifically, I believe it's called Quake Howling, which is the stun move that I mentioned earlier, which isn't designed to do a lot of damage, brings you directly down into the center of where you stood and creates a stun. Also, your enemy is probably not going to be caught by that stun because you're going to drop faster than them. The Knuckles know that they're meant to be on the ground, but they acknowledge that air defense may be necessary. There are some moves, and by some I mean probably about one, that do tracking for enemies in the air. And there's really only one anti-air move, which is one of the weakest moves for the Knuckles in your entire repertoire. So the only true con, and again, these cons are debatable when it comes to fighter, is the fact that only really the dagger supports ground and air combat equally, or for equal amounts. Now, as far as the class pros and cons, which y'all knew was coming, I mean, the inconsistency with aerial combat once you stop using the twin daggers could lead to a situation where people prefer just that weapon, or they call themselves a weapon main on a class, which is very limiting. You got 3 to 4 weapons on every class you can use, but you want to focus on one. Why limit yourself, you know? But apparently that's a personal opinion, even though Sega didn't design it to be one weapon per class. But hey, you play how you play as long as you're having fun, right? One of the greatest things I like about this class and of the class pros is simply the fact that your enemy is never in a position to where you truly are responsible for your whiffing if you're paying attention. With the exception of possible glitches or enemies teleporting and warping, you can make sure everything lands because your enemy can practically never escape you. In the case of the Knuckles, you got 2 or 3 moves that'll literally rush towards the enemy and they won't stop till they hit something or until you let go of the Photon Art special button. The twin daggers, hey, I already told you, they gave about 2 or 3 moves that have built-in homing as far as the Photon Arts go, and they don't cost a lot. Double Saber, not so much. But since you have some Photon Arts that can be thrown, you can actually kind of argue that Double Saber is meant to be or can handle being a mid-range type fighter weapon because it can be thrown out. It can hit a wave of enemies standing in front of you with most of the normal attacks and Photon Arts. And also, you know, when your limit gear gauge is full, you can do that much more damage and you have that much more of a striking radius, as notated by increase or lengthen special effects once you swing your weapon, like with every other Photon Art and every other class where you get a boost like that. But other than, you know, the ability to dodge and stuff in air, you can hold on to shifter and D-band or strength increase, defense increase longer than normal with very little modifications on your skill tree. And it's just naturally hard to hit this class. And no matter what state it's in, whether it's, you know, low HP, high HP, physical attack, sorry, not physical attack, status effect, no status effect, there's always some way to reduce the cost of doing a move and increase the damage it can do in some way, shape, or form. And not many classes can say that. In fact, I believe, yeah, you actually can't quote me on this one. There's no other class in the game that gets strength and stat boost from having a status effect that is negative on them. Yes, I'm looking at the skill tree as I say that, but yeah, that is one of the best things about it. Now, as far as class cons, the range, oh God, the range. However, you know, theoretically speaking, you know going in with a class like this, that this is the closest. You're not meant to be far hitting things from afar. You're just not. In fact, throughout all the weapons, I believe there's only 3 Photon Arts of the collective, I want to say almost 20 to 30, 20-ish Photon Arts for the entire class that actually get you some true, genuine long range stuff going on. So is that really a con based on the fact that the class isn't even supposed to be hitting like that in the first place? I guess that's up for you people. Now, that aside, the other one, and again, this also falls in the category of pro and con, is what I mentioned earlier of some of your best boosts, or some of your, in order to link up most of your boosts, you have to put yourself in a state that's considered dire, either with extremely low HP, courtesy of something called limit break. We're going to get into it soon when we go through the skill tree, or through various things also in the skill tree, which is going to come up later, that keep a status effect on you, but then allow you to boost up how much damage you do, or boost up how much damage you do when an enemy has a status effect. So it's high risk, high reward type situation. Imagine if Hunter was gambling with its own ability to, be potent in battle. And you can pretty much understand the fighter. And then throw in some invisible wings because you can fly pretty much. All right, now let's get into that skill tree. Now, just a reminder, the collective thoughts on the group who make these videos on the skill tree differs sometimes by the day, or differs based on what somebody has on their personal build versus what just seems like a very, very good thing or smart thing to invest in, or what might be something technical or have a low value until later. But I'm going to try to get into as much as possible. And again, keep in mind, I am not going to sit here and give you a ranking and rating system for every single thing on the skill tree, because besides the fact that the timing for this video being insane, the goal is to review the whole class, not just the class skill tree. So I'll try to touch on some things that I feel are no-brainers or whatnot. And as always, I will not tell you that any skill tree is idiot-proof. Other people who've worked on these videos will say that from time to time, but me personally, the person who's speaking everyone's words, I'm not going to tell you that any skill tree is idiot-proof. Although I do have some reservations about Hero. That's another time. All right, so as far as the essentials go, and by essentials I mean if you don't have these, you're not functioning right, and I'm not saying that to be insulting. Air reversal, which exactly what it sounds like, you recover or reversal your momentum, and you make sure that you can recover on the ground and in the air as soon as you're hit. As long as you're in a spiraling state, enemies can continue to do more damage to you. So that little bit of time you get with aerial reversal to correct yourself could be a godsend, especially in particular if you have the twin daggers equipped. Because if something is still coming, or there's another wave of damage coming, and you've been knocked back as like you're in a Dragon Ball game, the minute you activate aerial recovery with your jump button, if you tap the weapon action button, a lot of times, hey, it can save you. Or at least it can make sure you don't take enough damage to where, you can't sit on the ground and pop a healing item to make sure you can survive what else is coming. Next jump, exactly what it sounds like. I don't know why they decided to not call it double jump, which is like an industry standard, but hey, as long as you know what it does. Many people have told me they consider step attack debatable or dash attack, because step is not really a step, it's a dash in this game. But personally, I feel like it's necessary because if it can help you start a combo or get into your enemy closer on a class that does its primary damage up close and continuously, I feel like it should be a no-brainer. And of course, the factored in step attack, just attack combo, step just attack, or should I say step attack just attack? Well, I'll just call it what it feels like. Step just attack combo is also necessary because we all know that when you get the red ring around your character, any move you do after that is going to do possibly its highest potential damage, or more than it normally would if you didn't wait. So why not be able to start off like that immediately after doing your rush attack? First edition just attack edition, no pun intended, allows you to start off anything you do, let alone your dash maneuver, with that increase. And the best part is that it takes one level. In fact, everything I've mentioned so far has only got one level investment. Step jump, also a no-brainer. During a recovery action, switches to sprinting. It's necessary. It can save you when you see something coming, or if you're in the air and you notice that, oh man, I have very limited range and maneuverability because I'm not using my twin dagger. Anything that can get you an ounce of evasion, usually a good idea. I wouldn't invest a lot of points into it because, it is how it is with this game. There'll always be something that can grab you or get a hold of you, whether your dash is the maxed out or not, unless you're forced. They go through everything and dash through everything, but that's another time and another story. Now, there's also traditional strike attack increasers. Again, these are a no-brainer. There's 3 of them, and they do exactly what they sound like. They make your base attack for your fighter increase. The maximum, I believe, is about 50 for the level 1, and the level 2 and 3 both cap out at having a 75 increase. So 75 times 2, then plus 50, and that lets you know how much extra you're getting. But see, here's the thing. A lot of weapons in relation to close range classes, instead of having a level determination before you're able to use them, they'll have a stat determination. So your base stat of your attack or your defense or your dexterity, which very important, and we'll get into that soon. So what that means is you could find yourself in a situation where, I don't know, let's say you only want to start with attack boosters on your tree for some reason, and you'll get the normal and traditional stuff on a fighter later. That means that now you could potentially be using weapon rarities that are 3 to 4 times higher than what the rest of your peers are at like level 10 or 20. And how cool would it be, even though again you're going to have those sacrifices, to be the guy who's level 20 but he's running around with like level 40, level 50 standard equipment as far as weapons go. But again, there's a high price for that because you're sacrificing everything else that you would consider, you know, more useful or traditional. Now, the high level bonus and the limit break insurance, well, I'm gonna say limit break insurance is a little bit more important, but high level bonus cannot be denied because it's a universal benefit. It increases your natural power output with a max of 105%. But the limit break insurance, which is the one I will tell you to go for immediately, during limit break, when you receive damage that would kill you, incapacitate you, because no one dies in this game somehow, turn on limit break instead and survive with 1 HP instead. Every time this effect takes place, the cooldown is increased. Don't forget that though. Every time you do this, how long it takes to reactivate increases. And remember, high level bonuses or the 85 unlocked skill tree items are only for the main class. So even if you unlock them, if it's not your main class, you're not going to be using them. Now, I mentioned dexterity earlier. Let me get into that. I know I've said it in previous videos, but you know, not everybody's going to look at every video. So unlike pretty much every traditional game I've ever played, dexterity inherently works different in Phantasy Star Online 2. Dexterity increases the base damage that you hit your enemy with, which is, I don't know why they did that. Why not just, you know, do critical or strength increase? What I mean by that is, for example, let's say that with your weapon, the maximum damage you can hit an enemy with a normal attack is 3 and your max critical is 6. But if you have low dexterity, you might find yourself doing 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 damage, and rarely do you get a 3, and rarely do you get a critical that does 6, and instead it'll always do 4, 5, 4, 5, 4, 5. The more dexterity you have, the more your maximum damage output per strike stays at a base level. So let's say you have all the dexterity in the game and you're level 1. All of your damage should read, if it's a normal attack, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. And all of your critical should read the maximum amount, 6, 6, 6, 6. Well, yeah, you get the idea. I don't know why they decided to do that. Also, the game doesn't properly explain that, which I've always found a little bit odd. Or rather, if they have explained it, I haven't come across the part of the tutorial that does. Keep in mind, I've been here since the beta, so they could have added an explanation later. But even after looking as early as about 2 months ago, I didn't see much explanation outside of people telling each other manually or online about how the dexterity stat works, which I find a little odd. Now, one of the ones I've always debated, and I have multiple skill tree layouts for fighters, so I use it differently, is the fact that you can increase your natural HP stat. Obviously, that seems like that would be a no-brainer. Why would you not get that? But in the case of fighter, it may come with a future restriction. See, the HP increases go up to 10 and they give you an extra 50 HP, and there's only 2, so that means you get 100 flat. But remember that limit break skill I told you about? Yeah, well, here's the thing about it. Here's what it actually does. The limit break skill, not the limit break gear, which I call the limit break gear, but the skill tree limit break, which is only on the fighter. That thing cuts your HP down by a large percentage temporarily. In fact, let me see. Reduces your maximum HP and temporarily gain a damage bonus. Okay. Yeah, it does 1/4. So 25% of what your max HP is. And it can only be used on your main class. And the duration once capped out is a full 60 seconds. But the power increase once capped out is 120. Now here's the cool part. To get the maximum power damage output, you only got to put it to 5. Whether or not you go to the full 10 is up to you. Everything after the 5 is really just an effect on the cooldown and also the duration of the move. And no matter what, across the board from level 1 to 10, like I said, it takes 25% or 1/4 of your entire HP and locks you out of it. So it changes what your base amount is. Now, here's the thing. It doesn't affect your defense. I mentioned that. I didn't mention it, but it doesn't affect your defense. It only affects your HP and your attack boost. So if you've got more HP, if something hits you, it's going to be harder for them to kill you outright. Because, the move you survive when you don't have limit break isn't necessarily a move you'll survive when you do have your limit break gauge active on the fighter. Obviously, you should be ducking, dodging, blocking, twirling, and staying in and out of the air to avoid things. But again, Sega is not going to make a game where literally every single thing that you do can be ducked, that an enemy can throw at you can be ducked and dodged. It's just not going to happen. And even if they did do that, they could fix it with a patch. Let's be honest, they totally could. So that's why I have one build where I do heavily utilize HP increase and one where I don't. Now, as far as the build where I don't, it's mainly due to the fact that you sacrifice some things that you might want or can dramatically increase your power later on in the bottom half of the skill tree, which we're going to go to that right now. We're going to start at the middle, then go to the bottom since we went to the top already. All right, so in the middle, your gear gauge abilities are unlocked. Now, I'm not going to tell you you need to get every last one of these. Yes, it's a good idea. There's 6 of them in total, and you only need 6 because there's 1 per weapon. So the double saber gear costs you 1, and the double saber weapon action ability also costs you 1. So that's 6 altogether based on the fact that you have the 3 weapons, and nobody seems to care about the gunblade weapon. I haven't seen a skill tree that has acknowledged the gunblade weapon probably ever. Now, in the case of the twin dagger, like I told you, it helps you do your slight jump and tilts that actually, deflect or block damage altogether. Anytime you see a blue ring energy around your character, you didn't take damage or you took extremely reduced damage. So you can think of it like a blue super armor barrier. But once you get the second part in the gear section, the weapon action, twin dagger spin move, you can also somewhat move your character in every direction that you can think of, although it won't be by a lot. Yes, you do lose a little bit of air, but it's a very, very quick maneuver. So more than likely, you can do a photon art that gets you that same air you lost back. And it does a little bit of damage to enemies. Now, the Knuckle Gear and the weapon action booster it's kind of the same thing. The Knuckle Gear, as I mentioned, every time you do any form of move, you increase the speed of your actual attack. And the more you do, the quicker you get to that maximum of 3 on that Knuckle Gear gauge. But the weapon action ability, which isn't really a weapon action ability on the Knuckle, is Gear Booster. So instead of, maybe taking 4 maneuvers to max out your gear gauge for your Knuckle, you can do it in 2. So like I said, Knuckles is going to get to its potential, its highest potential, faster than a lot of other weapons. But like I said, these are all here for the weapons you're going to use. If you have a particular weapon that you don't care about, you're probably not going to mess with all these. I would strongly recommend you changing your opinion because, what if you get that one rare that changes your opinion about a second or third weapon on your class? But, hey, you play to have fun, not to do what you're told. Now, directly above the Knuckle, though, it needs to be mentioned, Critical Strike is very, very beneficial. But also, again, this also ties into your dexterity. If you're not going to invest in dexterity boosting things, you might not enjoy Critical Strike as much. And now what it does is it increases your critical hit rate and gain a damage bonus to criticals. So not only do you increase your odds of doing a critical, but you actually increase the damage to it. So obviously, critical and dexterity are like peanut butter and chocolate, not jelly. I said chocolate. They just work really good together and they're meant to be together. However, again, based on the limited explanation that Sega's given on dexterity, some people may not have come across it. I would say try to spec your mag based on what class you're going to play forever, but things could change. They always add new classes and what's good on your mag for one class may be detrimental to another. So that's why I don't really focus on any mag related stuff. If we do mag stuff, that would be a guide, not so much a review. Not really a fan of reviews, or rather, I'm not reviews. Not really a fan of guides. Don't hate them, just I know how quickly they can become obsolete in a game that always updates and changes, you know? All right, moving on down. Now we get into the various stances and cost reducers and stat buffs that make the fighter truly what it is. First up is Brave Stance. As long as you're hitting the enemy from the front of their body, not your body, their body, you get a damage increase from that angle. The max being 140%. Now here's the thing though, it does reduce the damage you do from behind on your enemy in the beginning. Again, once you get to that 5 mark, things seem to shift. So once you get to level 5 on the Brave Stance, you get no damage reduction from hitting the enemy from any side of the body that's not the front. And even when you max out the Brave Stance, you technically get a rear power booster too. Except instead of getting, 101 or 102%, it gets to 135. So at the end of the day, there's only a 5% difference. And it's the same for its opposite, Wise Stance. The biggest difference with Wise Stance and Brave Stance, though, is for some reason they set it to where Brave Stance gives you an extra 5% more than Wise Stance does. Not sure why it's like this. So when Rear Stance is level 10, you do 135% more damage. You get 135% damage boost from hitting them from behind. Brave Stance, hitting from the front, you get 140. I'm not sure why they did that. And the front power stance or the front damage for Wise Stance at max is 130%, as opposed to Brave Stance behind power being 135. So there's a 5% difference, and that's why you'll see a lot of people not really mess with Wise Stance and prefer Brave Stance. Now, of course, both of these have their own little branch offs. In the case of Brave, it's called Brave Stance Up, and Wise Stance, same thing, Wise Stance Up, and then there's Brave and Wise Critical. And if it wasn't obvious, once you activate these moves, Chain Reaction, you'll be able to increase your odds of doing a critical by a max of 25% with whichever stance you prefer. And as far as the Stance Up, it gives you an extra 10% damage increase once you get it to level 5. Or, sorry, 110%. Percentages. Not a big fan of math. So yeah, if you max out everything on the entire Brave Stance tree, you're looking at getting 150 peak damage and 25% on critical, and same with Wise Stance. So it's really just a matter of, do you care if you're hitting your enemy from the front, or do you care if you're hitting your enemy from the back? That always sounds awkward. And of course, right next to them is one of my personal favorites, and you only got to invest 1 stock in it. I can't recommend this enough, and it's called Adrenaline. Now, I know what you're thinking. If you have a move that increases how long you have an attack boost or a defense boost, but you can't use magic, what true value is there in it? Well, this is an MMO. You're almost never playing the game alone. Chances are, in a competent party, somebody has the ability to cast a strength boosting shifter or defense boosting D-band. Also, you can buy a shifter and a D-band from the item store, so you could have it yourself. So that excuse is null and void. And it actually gives you a flat out 30-second increase. So if your boost gives you, we'll say 60 seconds, congratulations, you got an extra 30 seconds. And there's no downside to it whatsoever. I've yet to hear someone ever complain about Adrenaline. And across from them, or adjacent I should say, is the Tech Arts tree, which has 2 slots. The Tech Art Just Attack bonus and Tech Art Photon Point Save. Now the Just Attack bonus, exactly what it sounds like. You gain a damage bonus when you use different Photon Arts and techniques in succession. That means any Photon combo string you want to use, as long as the move after it is not the exact same as the last one, you get a boost. The max being level 5 at 115%. Now the Photon Point one is a reducer, which that's what you really want. It reduces the photon point consumption when you use different Photon Arts. Now, the amount that you reduce it is set per Photon Art move. So if you do it 2 or 3 times in a row, it's not going to give you a different reduction. It's going to stabilize. When it's a fighter weapon, you get a 75% reduction at max for using different photon art moves in your combo. If it's a non-fighter weapon, you only get a maximum of 85% reduction from other weapons. So if you have a subclass, they get a benefit off of it too. But the reduction is 85. Or I'm sorry, it says consumption rate. Sorry. So for fighter consumption rate, you get 75% with any fighter weapon. But if you have a subclass, their max is going to be 85. And I like this one in particular. One, because first off, you don't have to get to level 10 to get the maximum. It stops at level 5. Anything that caps at level 5, I somehow end up liking. But it's because not only does it let you do more continuous damage, you also get a discount for that continuous damage. So like I said, this class is really meant for continuous damage, surprising absolutely no one. Now, some of the more, I guess, controversial or conflicting things on the tree are at this bottom area, which are the chase and the deadline or half line style of things. For starters, chase advantage increases damage against enemies with a status effect. So unless you're factoring into your weapon build where you give it a built-in status effect and there's a high proc rate, you might not see a lot of use out of this unless you have a magic user on your team, because inherently nothing from the photon arts is going to cause a status effect in the fighter tree. So if you got a magical sub, this may be where, you know, you may start seeing a little bit of synergy. And of course, it has a built-in chase advantage plus AKAs, a booster of the skill that is directly above. It's a pretty standard affair for this game. And right next to that is the half-line booster. And the half-line booster increases your chance to inflict a status effect. So you may actually enjoy that if you have any weapons that have a status effect affix on it, and it increases the chance of it occurring by 200%. So whatever your odds are, hey, they just got doubled. But again, if you don't care about anything like this, or you don't want to invest in this because you know it'll hurt your potential ability to get some damage increasers in the skill tree, you know, play how you want to. Chase bind, which, excuse me, still under the chase advantage tree. This one actually lets you cause a status effect, but only if your enemy already has a status effect. And the status effect is only one, and it's obviously it's bind. So imagine somebody poisoned an enemy and you go over there and hit him, and then every so often you have a 70% at max chance of causing bind, which is immobility in the game. So again, it's a selective power increaser, and you have to ask yourself, do you want that? Because I'm not going to tell you. Now, one of the more unique ones, or the more preferred ones, is the Slayer area. There's Deadline Slayer, which increases your strike attack and range attack, which I find a little odd, given as how there's no range weapons on fighter. But hey, they're synergizing off the bat, so who can blame them? Kicks in when your HP is below 25%. Generally speaking, though, unless you're at limit break, most people want to heal themselves when they're that low, because that usually means next hit is going to kill you. There's a PP Slayer version of this, or a photon point version. However, it does 50% or below your photon level. You get that attack increase. So basically, the last attack in your photon art combo list is going to do more damage with a max of 200. And again, it also applies to your range attack and your T attack. So obviously, fighter's meant to be a main and have a very good or strong sub to complement some of these skills. Now, those are the only two as far as the deadline go. Now, half line, which very similar, except it starts at 50% or below, so it's much more reasonable, gives you a max once your HP drops below 50% of 100 attack in all categories, S, R, and T, strike, range, and technique. Now, Crazy Heart, which, weird name for it, when you get hit by a status element, your rate of regrowth for your photon points goes up 200 more %, or double, depending on how you want to look at it. Now, the value in that is up to you, because I sacrifice Crazy Heart and everything down there for power and crit boosters and stat boosters. So I can't tell you I've gotten a lot of use out of it. I didn't like it, and I reset my tree within like 2 days after messing with it. But Crazy Beat, on the other hand, especially in certain areas where you know that most of the enemies are going to have magic, may give you a little bit more advantage. Crazy Beats, unlike Crazy Heart, increases your strike attack damage by 200 points, not percent, 200 points when you're under a status effect. Now, I know that boost seems crazy, no pun intended, so sorry about that. But remember, when you're in a status effect, your natural instinct is to remove it, or someone in your party is going to try to remove it. So this boost is very, very, very limited. You're not going to stop what you're doing and tell people, hey, when I get a status effect, don't heal me. When my HP gets low, don't heal me. Because you can find yourself in a very, very unusual situation, especially in areas where, you know, death is counted against you. There are a couple modes and, you know, stages and special quests like that in game. Also, no one can manually target who they heal. It's a radial situation. And of course, that leaves us with what we already discussed earlier, the limit break. So I'm not going to go into too much about it. But I will talk about the passive skill connected to limit break. Photon charge. Now, what this does is it allows you to recover all your photon points after limit break ends. Only if limit fighter is your main class. Does anyone get any use out of that? Personally, when limit break ends for me, I want to make sure my HP is back where it used to be. Or if I haven't killed the thing that I was trying to kill with limit break, I want to back up and, you know, recoup myself, regain, and possibly switch weapons. But hey, that's just me. So yeah, that's pretty much everything on the tree. Like I said, you know, I'll tell you some no-brainers, but everything else, it's pretty much up to you. Again, I'm not guiding you on the skill tree. I'm just showing and talking about what's there. Now, with that being said, who should play this class? Well, that's very, very simple. One, did you like Hunter? Did you like beating something and bludgeoning and cutting something to death with Hunter? Okay, go ahead and grab Fighter. And then the only true issue you're going to have is, do you want Fighter as your main or your sub? So it's almost a reverse issue of with Braver. Do you want to go down the close range or long range part of the skill tree? It's a matter of, do you want Fighter to be a sub or main? I can recommend this class for new people, but I will say that the photon arts and the way your character naturally moves between the twin dagger and the knuckle may be a little bit annoying, but the technicality or the skill ceiling is low. What you really want to focus on with the twin dagger is juggling. And since the enemies have almost no retaliation once they've been hit in air and put in air, learning to juggle is not going to be that hard. The real issue is when you get bosses who can't be juggled, or they're part of the background area in the stage and they're doing a move you can't see because you're targeting some body part and you didn't know that something was coming. That may put some people off, but hey, you'll get over it real quick based on the damage output you're naturally going to do. The Knuckles, it's going to annoy you with the speed sometimes and also the very, very limited range. But again, when you fight a boss and you singularly focus on something like a weak spot, there's almost no other weapon you're going to really want in your corner as a fighter. The double saber is the, oh, you think I only hit what's in front of me? Fuck you situation. In case it wasn't obvious, this is not a child-friendly channel. Not because, you know, blood and gore, but hey, I allow people to swear on this channel. I'm not going to stop them anytime soon. So, yeah, sorry if you got an issue with swearing. Hey, at least I did it near the end of the video. So, double saber is meant to cluster things together. And if you want to, you could even switch your weapon after you create its weapon action tornado and do an insane amount of damage across the board on everything that's sucked into that location. See, this class is one of the only classes outside of a magic user that has any form of a technique that makes enemies stick together. And it's a beautiful sight. Now factor that in if you were lucky enough to pull off getting chase spine activated. Now you got a bunch of enemies that can't move. Hell, I'm going to go get my knuckle. And they going to learn the value of the full knuckle shuffle. It's a little bit of a North American colloquialism, but yeah. Full knuckle shuffle means somebody basically about to beat the crap out of you with their bare hands. So I can honestly recommend this to noobs, and I can recommend this to intermediate players. However, intermediate players may want to more focus on building up the stuff that's universal and that can be utilized on a main and a subclass, because a more experienced player may want to experiment with how good or bad does this class do as a sub versus a main with something else you have. Now, as far as skill ring options, well, normally, you know me, I would immediately tell you, to get the strike rings. But the strike rings come from the fighter tree. So you know what that means. The way the game is put, the class that the rings would come from on a skill tree are not allowed to use that ring. However, there is Valor Fighter Ring or Fighter Valor Ring. Every class has a Valor Ring. I recommend maxing that out for your right slot. And for your lefty, two things I think you might like, which is the Mate Lover. But of course, by now, you should probably have this infused in your armor. Not sure why you can fuse rings in your armor, but what that does, it increases the speed that you use a healing item, not magic attack item at. So if you max that out, if you're in a situation where you're getting just really low on HP because you got limit break on or limit breaks off and something caught you at that perfect time, boom, you can do a mono mate 3 or 4 times and possibly under 5 seconds when that thing's maxed out to level 20 and you're good to go. Or, and this is for those, who are more understanding and want to have a little bit more defense on the natural glass cannon nature, which is glass cannon meaning high attack, low defense, or easy to knock out issues that come up with fighter. You might like a maxed out party of toughness, because the more people in your party, I believe it even includes NPCs, you get a naturally big damage increase. Not damage increase, defense increase. By percentage. I believe the maximum once level 20 is 8% or 10% defense increase universally just by having 4 people in your party. But again, you do what you want to do. Now, as far as high synergy class mixes, well, let's just get this out the way. Phantom is good as a sub because even though pretty much nothing on the skill tree increases your stats or modifies you, just having that class as a stub increases your natural stat line more than any other class will in the game by at least 80 to 90 points, if not more, depending on what your class's weaknesses are. Phantom is meant to be a subclass. Not to mention all the advanced classes so far, you can't really have a sub with it anyway. Hero can't be a sub either, so it's just Phantom, which is a unique situation. However, if you want synergistic skill trees, not so much stat lines, it goes without saying Hunter, Hunter, Hunter. No, not the show. Hunter, due to the fact that it has passive skills that increase your damage for your base attack as well as a charge attack and a just attack and a critical attack. Now, with the exception of charge attack, that means that fighter gets a benefit in every single category. And these are passives. And most of the game's passives, they automatically kick in. You don't have to put them on your hotkeys and then, boom, activate them that way. So it's really, really, really beneficial. Now, an alternate benefit, and, again, this is depending on what your initial background or primary class was before you got the fighter. You actually may gain something from having a magic class or the hybrid magic class, bouncer, or more particularly techer. Because one, Techer has high defense on top of the Techer, the magic defense. And the weaknesses of fighter pretty much begin and end with the fact that it's a glass cannon. You even have a skill that makes you a glass cannon, limit break. But also now you can utilize magic. So what does that mean? That means that the bottom left-hand corner of your skill tree from Chase Bind, Half Line to Chase Advance, and Crazy Beat and Crazy Heart, their value dramatically increases. Because instead of having some special effect ability on your weapon, you could have a magic spell on a hotkey or switch over to a wand, a talisman, a universal, 14 or something, the blood weapons for another magic weapon, and you can create that effect. Even if it doesn't do, it's a move that doesn't do a lot of damage, it has a high chance of creating the status effect. Switch right back over to fighter weapons and go to town. And that's a beautiful sight. Also, let's not forget, limit break does a universal power increase of 120% at max. So imagine if you activated Limit Break and you hit an enemy with this elemental weakness and it's a fully charged, very, very powerful magic move or technique, which, man, they really need to work on these. They really need to work on how they phrase these things, because technique can be used for almost a third, if not more than half of the actual maneuvers in the game. But yeah, and that's why I say magic, to cut down on confusion. The damage potential, this should do a quick stack up. If Limit Break is on, that's 120%. Now, mind you, it's only striking attacks. Remember, your back class is Wand. Wand has striking and magic on it. And most recently, they gave it one photon art, not to be confused with a magic technique called Heavy Hammer. So if you charge it even to its level 1 or level 2, and you have Limit Break on, and let's say, I don't know, you have a stat proc increasing ability, excuse me, from the Techer skill tree turned on. You do a Heavy Hammer once, an effect turns on you, then you do it again with Limit Break still on, plus all of your chase, half-line, crazy heart and beat stuff turned on. You could probably dead something in under 2 shots, not to mention Brave stance or a Wise stance turned on. The synergy is just there for a lot of classes with Fighter. And then there's Gunner, which came out at the same time as Fighter. So naturally, Sega automatically assumed people would mix them together, or at least they should have known we would. So now you get long range, or I guess, depending on how you look at it, mid-range and close range attack, as well as close range, up close and personal stuff. But you've got the aerial maneuverability of the daggers and the twin machine guns at the same time. Not to mention the possibility of Brave stance and Wise stance, as well as the other things I mentioned in the skill tree earlier that have to do with stat buffing, because most of them are not actually locked to striking damage and potential. Yes, Limit Break is, but stuff like Chase Advance, it just gives you a power increase of 125. And even though it's for striking, what if you got, you know, a very, very powerful stat effect inducing, like we'll say level 4 or level 5 on your twin machine gun for, I don't know, poison. So you do one move or you do one combo with the twin machine gun, switch back to the dagger, or you switch to any striking weapon, and then you automatically get a damage increase, and no magic had to be involved. Plus, you got to hit him from far away before you got up close. Not to mention, Gunner can also use the rifle and all of the rifle's photon arts. And since rifle has about 3 photon arts that have rapid attacks, imagine you have a high level status effect on the rifle. You activate it at the beginning of a monster spawning or a boss fight, and then you immediately go and switch to your striking weapons for the remainder of the fight. So without you even applying Brave stance, potentially adrenaline, and, you know, tech art, just attack bonus, and Limit Break, you already just guaranteed yourself a base 125% increase to your striking damage. Not to mention, if you got Chase Advance Plus, that one has the level 5 cap, and it's 115%. You're good to go. Your enemy probably might not even last a full 30 seconds. Think about it. You could be level 10 or 20 with this class, and depending on how you spec it, your damage at critical could be rivaling something that's almost 20 or 30 levels higher than you. And you know, that's before factoring in Limit Break. So Fighter is a very malleable class as far as when it comes to synergizing as a main. As a sub, we'll get into that when we get into that. Remember, it's good to mix the class, and the main class we're discussing has to be the one that's the primary and not the sub. And obviously, you know, I guess I should mention, just based on how it's naturally produced and comes out, Bouncer. Bouncer, kind of like the Fighter of the magic classes, its weapons utilize strike attack and magic simultaneously. But because of this, it's never truly leaning too far in one category or the other. So the twin swords, they're primarily striking, but you can still use magic with them. They would work beautifully with this skill tree. And also, you got magic right there. You put something on your hotkey, like I said, something cheap, dirty, high level of status effect chance, And then now you ain't even got to change to a traditional fighter weapon. The jet boots have skill tree elements that let you switch which the primary stat is going to be struck with for your combos, whether it's magic based or it's strike attack stat based for the jet boots. Not to mention, again, any class that can utilize magic automatically just has a higher survivability, in my opinion, just due to the fact that you got your heals right there. You can pop them in the time it takes you to press one button on your hotkey. Because everything else in the game that's a regular healing item, with the exception of the chargeable magic healing items, they have a set timer on them. Yes, you can buy and create things like I mentioned earlier, the skill rings that reduce it. It kind of is a moot point if you get, oh, here's a heal from my magic skill. Press it once, boom, it activates within less than 2 seconds. And that's at level 1 of the magic attack. Not to mention status effect removers, also by the name of Anti. Again, both of them can activate from magic on your hotkeys in less than 2 seconds. So, yeah, there's a lot to blend with that. Not to mention Limit Break. Let me check real quick. Strike attack, yeah. Limit Break can be utilized for both of the bouncer weapons, or the two that everyone loves, which is the twin sword and the jet boots. So you almost can't screw up a fighter bouncer combination. However, I'm going to tell you right now, that's one of those extremely technical situations. You almost have to plan having a bouncer as your sub from day one in order to make sure those trees sync together perfectly. But the potential is very, very large for those two to come together. Not to mention jet boots was the original weapon that had double jump, and it stays in the air just as good, if not almost as good as excuse me, as a fighter does. And the jet boots has 2 moves that can activate shift to and deban automatically. So even if you don't know the moves, it'll activate it. It's crazy to think about. They never stop helping each other. It's a fun conversation, a combination. It's a rare class mix on the game, but when you see someone truly good at it, man, it's a beautiful day. So yeah, that's pretty much all the synergized classes I can pretty much think of at this point. Obviously, there's going to be more, or some may have tried and experimented with other things that I didn't. And hey, good on you, you know. Talk to the group. Let us know stuff like that, and, you know, we'll add it whenever we can, or, you know, next year when the next round of class review stuff comes out. Because I'm pretty much set on not making a guide. I don't want to, just because of the nature of MMOs and things being in flux. But people will still say I'm making a guide, so it is what it is. Like I'm doing any of this alone. It's hilarious. All right, with that being said, I'm going to turn this over to other people, and if I can't get them to verbally speak, as you know, I'm going to say who they are, and I'm going to recite what they believe or feel works for this class. All right, catch you later. Okay, this next section is brought to you by my fellow guildmate A2, also known as A-chan, and yeah, has a very, very, very long history with Fighter, and gave a lot of information, including, much like Phoenix, a guide, or at least a guide in relation to Fighter Hunter. I'm going to leave the full thing in the descriptions, but for the time being, I'm going to just edit/heavily abbreviate the information he's given me for the sake of brevity. After editing, I'm pretty sure this video is already going to be over an hour anyway. Don't want to bore you guys to death. Alright, first and foremost, let's get into his pros and cons. In the case of Twin Daggers, one of the pros he mentioned is the damage burst is superb to this weapon, easy gear management, and fill up. You can literally have a full gear bar in just a few seconds with just a dash, jump, double jump, twin dagger spin, and boom, you got your 3 bars. Now when you're in the limit break, it has a super fast photon point recovery. Just 3 to 5 normal attacks to the enemy and you'll have full photon points already back. And these normal attacks are fast animations. You might end up recovering too much. We'll agree to disagree. I don't think too much is ever a thing. Now some of the cons he mentions with the weapon are this weapon's photon arts. Photon arts are very, very, very cost effective, which means that you're going to be hitting really, really hard, but you're going to be losing a lot as far as photon points go. Different PA usage is a must. You can't have a reduction when using the same photon art over and over again, as mentioned earlier with the skill tree stuff. The strongest photon art on this weapon is a last hit reliant. The photon art is called Orchestra, to which slashes the enemy multiple times and deals a really strong final blow to the enemy, to which you must land at all times. If you miss that last hit, you're losing DPS. So basically you don't want to miss with that one, otherwise, at the end of your photon chain, it's going to hurt you. As far as double saber pros and cons, remember, these are all highly abbreviated. Look in the full description at the bottom. It's really good area of effect, hands down. You can main fighter with this weapon alone. You can suck up enemies towards you with Chaos Riser photon art and do area of effect damage, as well as utilizing invincibility frames with Deadly Circle Type 0. And you can do that over and over again until the enemy dies. People will love you for this, because not only are you taking out a mob, but you're keeping them centralized in one location. This weapon is an all-rounder weapon. It can do bossing and mobbing really well, and that is why you can main Phi just by using this alone. Again, I don't recommend it, but hey, apparently he does, or he at least feels like it's viable. To each his own. Now, some of the cons he listed for the double saber are: if an enemy flies super high, you're pretty much going to wait for it to come down or switch to your twin daggers immediately. As I mentioned earlier, the only thing that has true aerial capability for this class is just the dagger weapon. Now for the Knuckles, his pros and cons are kind of sort of similar. For instance, the strongest burst for the fighter it can do is 999k on the backhand smash technique. Another thing it can utilize is, oh no, this one's just a con. However, for that same situation, it has a problem of consuming large amounts of photon points with a photon art skill called backhand smash, which is a whopping 40 photon points per usage, making it one of the most expensive techniques in the game, by the way. But if you have your skill tree set up a certain way, you can get it down to about 10. However, extremely short range still, as I mentioned earlier myself. In his opinion, this weapon is only good to use for exposed weakness, like a boss is staggered or down and literally showing its weak spot to your face. Otherwise, it's just best to use your twin dagger or your double saber. Okay, fair enough. And of course, after that, he gave me the Fighter Hunter Guide. Again, you guys can feel free to peruse these at your earliest convenience. But yeah, that's what I got so far. Alright, well, this video is long enough, and it's gonna be a bitch and a half to render and edit. Please enjoy it, and like I always mention, as long as you leave your comments and down in the description, and they don't necessarily have to be PG-13, but not derogatory and hell-bent on being insulting, feel free to leave them. Take care. Happy hunting. Oh no, that's